Void Mage Gamer is now partnered with Flipside Gaming, so you can use the promo code on their website, all caps Void Mage, to get 10% off all orders $10 or more. It's a great way that you can support both Flipside Gaming and Void Mage Gamer's channel. Also, until October 7th, all orders that use the promo code will be automatically entered to win a booster box of Guilds of Ravnica. Entries are limited one per person just to keep things fair, so be sure to check that out. Hello guys, welcome back to another Commander Deck Tech video. As always, I pull off a few options for my patrons over on Patreon. It's Guilds of Ravnica time, so I gave them a lot of those options. And overwhelmingly, they wanted me to do Etrata the Silencer. She is the other Dimir legendary creature in the set. 4 mana for a 3/5 legendary vampire assassin. She cannot be blocked. And whenever she deals combat damage to a player, you exile target creature that player controls, and you put a hit counter on that card. That player loses the game if they own 3 or more exiled cards with those hit counters on them. But here's the downside. Etrata's owner shuffles Etrata into their library. This is a huge downside, especially when we're talking about Commander. We want to be able to use it multiple times, and we probably want to win the game as soon as possible. Luckily enough, there is the tuck rule, which basically means if our Commander would go to anywhere other than the command zone, we can just send them to the command zone. But we don't even want to do that, because that means we're just going to have to play her again for 6 mana. That can be really slow, and by the time we get her out there, she might just get removed again. So we want a way to abuse this and also use her for removal, because in a practical sense, she's actually pretty good if you want to deal with your opponent's creatures. She is unblockable, so once you do deal that damage trigger, which is pretty easy, you get to exile a target creature. I mean, that's great removal in blue-black. But it is nice to go after that win con. Now, the way to do that is to use something like Strionic Resonator if you really want to abuse it. At first, I was thinking of something like a Fire Shrieker giving her double strike, but unfortunately, the first strike would happen, and then she would have the trigger where she shuffles without dealing the normal combat damage, so probably not a good idea to focus on double strike. Strionic Resonator, though, copies the trigger, so you will actually be able to exile 2 creatures, put hit counters on them, and get that much closer to killing off an opponent. Another cool way that you can abuse this, it is a little janky, but you could use a combo with Mirror Gallery and Blade of Selves. It's something I'm deciding to go for because I'm going to be playing some tutors in here. You can easily search it up. Having a Mirror Gallery out there with Blade of Selves pretty much means that those tokens aren't going to go away before they're able to deal damage, because that's the whole legendary rule. And with Myriad, you're able to have more Etrata swinging at more opponents, exiling more of their creatures, putting hit counters on them, getting closer to killing them off as well. But it's also just a great way to remove creatures too. Another cool way to abuse this, you don't even need Mirror Gallery, and that's Helm of the Host. Gets around the whole legendary rule by creating a token that isn't legendary. Token has haste and everything, so it's perfect for this deck. Etrata's win con happens when an opponent has 3 creatures with hit counters on them in exile, so it really doesn't matter if it's the original Etrata doing it or not. As long as there are 3, it'll work the same. Now, probably the best way to get around Etrata's downside is to use bounce effects, flicker effects, phasing, anything like that, just to disrupt the act of shuffling her into your library. You don't want to have to do that, and you really don't want to have to send her back to the command zone. So using some really good cost-effective options like Vanishing, Snap, or even the card Release to the Wind, these are all great ways that you can respond to the damage trigger, so you're still going to get the exile, but you're going to have Etrata either bounce to your hand, phase out, or exile, or even just flickered, so it doesn't really matter where she ends up. That damage trigger is going to happen, but she won't be shuffled back into your library or in the command zone, which is really the only downside to playing her. Looking at her first glance, she seemed a lot better to me, but there's a lot of things that you have to do in order to get closer to that win con. It's not a bad deck by any means, but you do have to kind of build around her entirely to avoid that downside. There's also cards in here like Vidalcan Mastermind. You could also play Erratic Portal and Crystal Shard. They all are going to pretty much do the same exact thing. Bounce Etrata back to your hand. These are good because they're just going to stay out there, more permanent than some of the other things in the deck. And if you're looking for a little bit more power, what I'm including in my deck is going to be the Deadeye Navigator combos with Peregrine Drake, Palinchron, just to get infinite mana, and you could do some really nasty things in here because we also play Venser Shaper Savant. I just feel more comfortable having that infinite mana in here because I'm also going to be including another card, Mnemonic Betrayal. This is basically the Yawgmoth's Will for your opponent's graveyards. I thought it would fit in really well with this deck because it has a theme of control. We are going to be playing a ton of counter spells. A lot of good spells are going to end up in our opponent's graveyards. Being able to play all of our opponent's stuff is pretty cool. And aside from the Deadeye Navigator combos, you also have Archaeomancer and Mnemonic Wall if you want to take advantage of those flicker cards I mentioned before. We do have Ghostly Flicker and Displace. Both of those are going to work out really well if you have Peregrine Drake or Palinchron and the Archaeomancer and Mnemonic Walls. That's going to generate infinite mana as well. A lot of cool stuff that you can do with this kind of deck. It's not super competitive, actually quite janky, but there's a ton of bounce effects, a ton of things that you can do to get around her downside, so I don't really see her being too problematic as a commander. I've seen much worse, guys. I just see a very strong control deck here with a chance to win off of a crazy win con, because again, in a practical sense, having a creature that can exile other creatures is pretty cool, even if it isn't going to win you the game. Even if you aren't going up against a creature heavy deck, there still is potential to get rid of one really good creature. Even if you're going up against a deck that doesn't play any creatures at all, chances are we have some opponents that are going to, and that's just further justification for playing the infinite mana combos I mentioned before. But anyway, guys, that's pretty much going to do it for this deck. The entire deck list will be in the description box below, so go check it out. Go check out my Patreon so you can vote on future video options. Anyway, you guys have a wonderful day. Void here signing off. See you all next video.